Hey guys, welcome back to another video in my favorite things from 2018 series. We've already done several of these, including audio, lights, lenses, camera monitors, and now we're getting to cameras. And I'm sure a lot of you already kind of know what I'm going to say here, at least those who are regulars here on the channel. But I thought it would still be good to go through the cameras and talk about why personally I grab these cameras when I need to shoot, as opposed to other options, because there are definitely more here in the studio that I could be using, but these are the cameras that actually work. They're the ones getting the job done here in the studio and the ones I choose. So let's get into the list. The number one camera for 2018 for me is the Panasonic GH5s. It's what's filming me right now and what you guys are watching. And the number one reason is image quality. Hands down, in my opinion, for the cost, that camera is just killing it when it comes to image quality. You can shoot up to Cinema 4K, 422, 10-bit, and in log, and it looks phenomenal. We'll talk about vlog here in a second because that's a big part of the whole Panasonic thing right now. I would also say the GH5 is pretty close when it comes to favorite cameras, but the reason the GH5s really stands out is several things. Number one, the field of view. It is wider when it comes to Micro Four Thirds. When you look at traditional stuff like the GH5 and previous Micro Four Thirds cameras, you just get a wider shot. And when you throw a Speedbooster on the camera, you're actually larger than APS-C, and if you throw on a 0.64 speed booster, you're getting pretty close to full frame. You won't have that autofocus of a lot of cameras like Canon's dual pixel or Sony's autofocus accuracy when shooting video, but you get a really nice wide field of view. And with those specs, it just makes for an amazing combination. So if you don't need autofocus and you have the coin to get that 0.64 speed booster, that combination is pretty deadly when it comes to the GH5s. The GH5s also has phenomenal low light capabilities thanks to that dual ISO, and you can also do great things with the color on this camera. Out of the box, it looks really, really good. Sure, it might not be Canon, but in my opinion, I much prefer it over Sony. And when it comes to shooting log on this camera, you have so much flexibility, it's ridiculous. I slightly overexpose all my shots, and that gives me a lot of flexibility to tweak things in post. There's almost no noise shadow when I do that. I just love working with these cameras, and that higher data rate of up to 400 internal is just an added bonus. What I also love is that you can shoot at 150 megabits a second if you want to record longer form stuff and not fill up your hard drives. So it's a great camera, and I would say if you have not shot on that camera, the GH5s or the GH5, just rent it, give it a shot, and see what you think, because I know a lot of people are pretty turned off by crop Micro Four Thirds sensors compared to full frame, but if you try it, you might be surprised. I know a ton of people who gave it a shot and ended up getting one because of that image quality. That's really where these cameras shine. When it comes to the GH5, the non-S version, I also thoroughly enjoy it, and I use this constantly for B-roll. Essentially, it's a GH5s that isn't as good at low light, a little more cropped in compared to the GH5s, and it has built-in image stabilization that to date is pretty much the best available right now. Handheld on this camera is ridiculously smooth. It essentially looks like you added about 15 pounds to the camera, which is phenomenal for documentary work. There's other reasons I love these cameras aside from the image quality. There's things like a flip out screen that I can look at right now, and one of my favorite things, hands down, that is something I just absolutely adore and I use constantly, is Wi-Fi. Let me grab an iPad that I have just out of frame here, and I'm actually using it to monitor myself and control the camera. I can stop and start, I can jump in and check my focus, I can actually change my focus just by dragging a box onto my face, and it's almost zero latency when it comes to monitoring. There's no stuttering like on the Sony apps. And you can use third-party apps like the one I'm using right now to get waveforms, vector scopes. If I rotate it, I can see at the bottom of my screen how my exposure is looking. Oh my gosh, I cannot tell you how often I use this. Anytime I'm rolling, I'm using this. It's like a free monitor if you already have an iOS device or an Android phone or something like that. So that's the case with all Panasonic cameras. So if I'm using something like the cheap G7, this will still work. And I know at this point, a lot of you might be thinking, what a fanboy, this guy is ridiculous. And while I do really love Panasonic's current offerings, it's not the only cameras I use. And at this point, I actually own Canon, Sony, Nikon for the first time ever, I think, Blackmagic, Panasonic, and Fuji cameras. So I've definitely been able to try this kind of intermediate, you know, 1,500 to $3,000 range, and I still prefer to use the Panasonic stuff. Now, if Sony or Canon or anybody really gets that image quality up to this level, I'm ready to rock and roll with another brand. But for now, in 2018, and probably through a good deal of 2019, these cameras are still going to be workhorses and something I prefer over other options. Okay, so enough talk about the GH5 and GH5s. My next favorite camera has to be the A7 III. It does not have the image quality of those two previous cameras, but what it does have is full frame 4K, which is surprisingly rare these days still, thanks Canon. And finally, it has wonderful autofocus along with full frame 4K. Pretty dope, right? So this camera I gravitate to when I want that autofocus. So right now, if I do this on Panasonic, I'm using a manual lens, so it won't autofocus, but it's just not gonna quite cut it compared to Sony. There's a lot of videos where I just wanna put something in front of my face and point it at the camera and have it just work, right? When it comes to focus. That's when I grab this guy. Now, the problem with it is there's no flip out screen. There's all kinds of HDMI issues and bugs, which I've talked about in the past. The Wi-Fi capabilities are pretty bad on this camera compared to Panasonic. And finally, the image quality just isn't there. Now, I've found some pretty interesting stuff that I will be talking about here on the channel, and I've talked about in my A7 III guide, which you can check out, where we'll kind of address the color and dynamic range. But it just really isn't gonna get it done when it comes to getting the most possible off of that sensor, like the GH5s and GH5. But I still love the autofocus, and so sometimes I'm gonna be shooting with this. Unfortunately, I have to do this when I shoot with it, add a monitor so I can actually see myself. But this camera is great, and I love what Sony is doing, and I'm really excited to see what they do with the A7 III. Hopefully we'll see kind of more of that image, you know, quality magic happen like we have on Panasonic. But I'm excited, and there's some great lens options, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what Sony does here in the near future. Honorary mention time. Now, I would love to add more cameras to this list, but I can't honestly tell you they would be my favorite. I do have the Fuji X-T3, which I've shot a little bit with, and I really dig it, but it just doesn't have everything I need to be a workhorse for me personally. And I haven't really shot with it enough to fully give my 100% recommendation. Same goes for the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera. You gotta add a lot of stuff to that camera to really get it to work, but I do enjoy it. And finally, the Nikon Z6 I just got in and will be playing more with. So I'd love to add those to the list. I'll maybe do that honorarily, but I can't, you know, back it 1000%. Like I can these three cameras that we just finished talking about. You'll notice the Canon EOS R is not on this list. I don't think it's the worst camera in the world, but for me personally, it's just not quite good enough for what I'm looking for. If I want really good autofocus, I'm gonna go with the Sony stuff because I already have tons of glass with them and whatnot. And when it comes to image quality, I have the GH5s, so I really don't need the EOS R, although for stills, my wife is using it and loving it. So that is gonna do it for my favorite cameras of 2018. It's also going to wrap up this series that we've been doing. I've enjoyed making it for you guys. I hope you have enjoyed watching it. I would also love to hear from you. What are your favorite cameras, lenses, monitors, audio gear, lights from 2018? I always enjoy seeing what people are using and digging. So that's gonna do it for me, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.